Well, it's so good to see all of you here. Thank you for coming out on a cold Saturday afternoon. I'm delighted to get a chance to meet those of you I haven't met before and to see some friends here that I have seen before and get a chance to visit again. It's really wonderful to get the chance to visit with you, and a little later, as was suggested in my introduction, I will take questions. I know there is a great interest nowadays. People are very anxious for more interactive Bible studies where there's a give and take and a sharing of thoughts. And I certainly love that myself and plan to do so here later on. But first of all, I'd like to talk to you a little bit. I'd like to tell you, first of all, why it is that I am on the radio teaching the Bible. And I think I'd better get my glasses out before I get too much further downstream here. Why I am on the radio teaching the Bible. I firmly believe that the Bible is God's testimony to man. It is His Word, and as such, it is quite capable of doing its own work. Down through generations on top of generations, this book, which a lot of you brought with you today, I see, and you know, it's an incredible document or collection of documents. When you understand how old some of this literature is, there is really nothing comparable to it in the world. There is no collection like it, nor has there ever been a collection of literature of any religion in the world that has had the kind of attention that this book has got. I mean, you can fill this building with the books that have been written about this book all by itself, from the attention that it's received from people. The oldest book in it is probably Job, they tell us, and the latest books in them have all now been, in spite of all of what the scholars have done and all their thrashing around about things and all of their skepticism, the books of the New Testament that you have in your Bible there, which we basically recognize as New Testament books, have all been firmly established as having been written in the first century. None of them are second century books. Scholarship has now, in this latter half of the 20th century, firmly established the truth of the testimony of the earliest writers from the second century about the Bible, that these 27 books are all first century books, and none of the other pretenders to the sacred literature of Christianity were even written in the first century at all. What you have in your New Testament is a very reliable documentation of the life and work of Jesus Christ on the one hand and the work of the early church on the other. And it is extremely powerful. Now, I do not believe that the person who is doing the teaching is as important as the Word itself, the Bible, the book. That if that book can be gotten out into people's homes and minds and be there for them to study, that if I can be on the air teaching the Bible and hold people's interest, point them to things in the Bible, bring things out they have not seen before, then the Bible will change their life, which is something I cannot do. I have no pretensions to it. I'm not going to try to do it. And I have made it very clear in the organization of Christian Educational Ministries that we govern no one. We have no interest in or responsibility for the governance of local church. We have a group that meets, you all meet in Lorena? In Lorena, nearby here. It's a small Christian fellowship here. We are friends. We work together, but they are not accountable to us, and we are not accountable to them. Our relationship is one of the Spirit, not of any human organization or any governance that someone might try to impose upon one another. This is really important to me, having been a part of a church that was really bound up in church government, handcuffed by church government, and what was, and the abuses, frankly, thereof that took place over time, that I concluded that if I was going to be of any effect for God and God's work in the latter part of my life, that I needed to be on my own, essentially, teaching and preaching the gospel independent of church organizations in order to have the freedom, the liberty to do what needs to be done, and to say what needs to be said without having the fear of somebody coming down on me or losing my job or finding myself out in the cold or what. Not that I would have. I have faced that question on more than one occasion and have come out of it with making the right decision. But there's a short passage I'd like to talk to you about out of Isaiah, the 6th chapter. It's an important passage in so many ways, and it concludes with a statement that is really in a lot of ways my guiding star. Seek you the Lord while He may be found. Call you upon Him while He is near. Isaiah 55, verse 6. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and let him return to the Lord, and He will have mercy on him and to our God, for He will abundantly pardon. It is not a difficult thing to achieve a pardon from God. Try getting one from the governor. But from God, it's not. He will abundantly pardon. He is ready to forgive. He is ready to write off your past. He is ready to go forward and look only to the future with you. But you have to be prepared to seek Him. And this is an interesting statement, while He may be found. Because what it suggests to me, and I trust it does to you, is that there is a time while He may not be found. And that in itself is really fascinating to consider. That in every person's lifetime, there is a time when God may be found and a time when He may not be. Now He goes on to say, forsake your way, let the unrighteous man forsake his thoughts, and let him return to the Lord, for He will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than yours. What a startling difference to think. And no one really, not one of us has a word of argument with that. We all know that God's thoughts and ways are higher than ours. And yet, from time to time, we live our lives almost as though we think we know better than God does. Then He comes to this, which I think is a pivotal say. He says, for as the rain comes down, and the snow from heaven, and does not go back there again, but waters the earth and makes it bring forth and bud, so it may bring forth seed to the sower and bread to the eater. This is the King James Version up until this point. At this point, I'm going to switch to New American Standard Version. But understand the image. The rain comes down, and it does not go back up like it came down until it has watered the ground, watered the seed, and caused it to bring forth. So, He says, shall my word be which goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, without accomplishing what I desire, and without succeeding in the matter for which I sent it. That's a sobering thought. To anyone who takes Bible in hand and begins to so much as read it to another person. And it is interesting to me, I was chatting with someone this week who was visiting with an elderly man who was dying. And I was struck by the fact that he said, just as I was leaving, the man asked me, he said, would you stay and read the Bible to me for a little bit? And the reason it struck me so much was the fact that it was it was partly a matter of a pivotal thing or a crossroads thing, but I have heard this again and again and again of people who are deathly ill, who are perhaps facing death, want someone to read the Bible to them. Even when they would be capable, I think, in many ways of reading the Bible themselves, they want someone to read the Bible to them. And whether you are able to explain it, expound it, answer questions, or anything else about it, that if you so much as sit by the bedside of someone who is dying and read to them from the pages of the Bible, you have done a good work. It is God's Word that makes the difference, not the teacher. Now, I think it is important that anyone who takes up the Bible be a person of integrity. You cannot be one thing today and something else tomorrow and be effective in the proclamation of God's Word. But the fact is, there are so many ways of looking at this, and there's one fascinating prophecy back in the 23rd chapter of Jeremiah where God speaks of a set of prophets and saying, I never spoke to these prophets. I did not send them, but they ran. He said, I didn't give them a message, but they spoke. And He says of these men that He did not commission, He did not send, He did not authorize. He said, but if they had caused my people to hear my word, then even they would have turned those people away from their wicked ways. Now, I am very reluctant to come and stand before you today and tell you that I am commissioned of God. For I would be bearing witness of myself, and as it's mentioned in the New Testament, if you bear witness of yourself, your witness isn't valid. So I can't come up here and claim from God some commission. And in fact, if I made the claim, I think you should be suspicious of it. For you have no way of knowing. If I told you that God appeared to me in a dream years ago, and He told me, Ron, you will go out and you will preach the gospel here and there, how do you know that's true? Answer, you don't. And so consequently, I feel it's better for me to approach you as I feel you should accept me, and that is, I have no special authority no commission from God that you can verify. Therefore, you have to take the word that I speak on its own merits. It is the message that is either true or that is not. And as far as I am concerned, I'm not what's important, except that I provide no stumbling block, except that I try to maintain the integrity so that as a person comes to know a broader basis what I speak, that if they find that there is a consistency through it, it doesn't, that I'm not off in one direction here and another direction there, and that requires a certain amount of discipline on the part of a teacher. But a teacher does need discipline, and he needs integrity, and that integrity means you have it together. And of course, I think also a speaker needs character. But I don't like to make those claims when I stand before people. This is why I tell you that it is the Word that is important. So when I had the chance of going on the radio after I started in Christian Educational Ministries last year, I was very happy to do that, and my decision as I went on the radio was that I would basically teach the Bible. So I went through Revelation. Then I did a series of 12 broadcasts, which I don't know if all of it was played here, on making life work, which was based on the book of Ecclesiastes primarily. And then from there I went into the book of Matthew, which I believe is now playing currently on the station here. Where is that station located exactly? In Belton, that's right. I just forgot at the moment. It escaped me. That series is now Matthew here, as all of our stations are, as they finish whatever they are on. We're moving them all to the same broadcast in the same week, which really simplifies our job. But now I'm in the book of Matthew, and I have done, I forget how many programs I've done in Matthew now, sort of losing track of it, about 22 or 23. And I have made it to Matthew 12. So it's going to be a very long broadcast series, as you can see. But there is so much to talk about, and to be able to get on the air and to read Jesus' words out into the air, and then just to talk about them as I would talk to friends. Because the approach that I take is of an intimate Bible study. It's you and me, and we're just talking about the Bible, and I'm trying to explain to you what I see and what I read, and to point out other scriptures and so forth. And the whole idea is that you would come to understand Matthew's gospel more clearly than you understood it before we started together. And that's my objective. And I believe, that Matthew's gospel is quite capable of doing its own work. My job is just simply to get it out there. Now, there's nothing, I think, either particularly surprising about the fact that one person responds to that program and another person does not. Because I've learned over time that there are two things that have to meet for a person to really respond to the Bible and to really begin to, let's say, come to God, turn their life around, be converted, be saved, whatever one of the conversational terms you want to use on it. There are two things that have to come together. One is understanding. They have got to come face to face with the passages in the Bible that have something to do with their life. They've got to come to understanding. And the second thing that has to be there is something has to exist or have happened in their life that causes that to make sense. This is one of the reasons I think why Jesus said, "How hardly shall a rich man enter the kingdom of heaven." Because not very many people that I have ever known, all the years that I've been a minister now, which is over 35, I have not known very many people whose lives were working like clockwork, ticking right along. Everything was fine at the time they came to God. They came to God because they felt a need. They came to God because their life wasn't working. They came to God because there were things that just weren't right. They were discontent. They were uncomfortable. Something was wrong. And so consequently, with that unease in their own life, whatever that unease to whatever degree, came into contact with a particular understanding from the Bible that met that need. That's where the turn begins to take place. And there's the two sides of the coin. Why am I teaching the Bible on the radio? The second part of that question is, why are people listening to me teach the Bible on the radio? And the answer is because of the power of the Bible to touch people's lives and to give meaning to their lives. This is why this chemistry takes place. This is why it works. It does take time. It takes quite a long time. We haven't been on Belton very long at all. It takes quite a while for people to listen, to get the habit of listening, to finally get around. You know, a lot of people will listen to a radio program like this, and while I am new on radio myself, I have a lot of experience with another organization with both radio and television. That it takes a rather a long period of time of listening to a program like this before a person is ever motivated to go get their Bible and look something up. Some people will listen for months before they ever are provoked enough to say, surely that's not what the Bible says. And to go get their Bible, get it down, and look it up themselves. It takes even longer than that for people to get around to picking up the phone and calling us, or calling the local number that might be on there. It takes longer than that for them to make any kind of a move beyond that, and longer than that if they should decide, you know, I really need to attend a church where there are people who believe like I'm coming to believe, where I can get the encouragement and support and so forth that I need with this new value system, this new belief system, this new awareness of God and obedience to God that I'm beginning to be aware of here. So things have to kind of come together. There's an interesting passage out of the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes that I'm really fascinated. It's been in the Songs, and it's doubtless familiar to you. This one's from the New American Standard Version. There is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pull up what's planted. There's a time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. There's a time to weep, and then there's a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn. There's a time to dance. There's a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time not to embrace. And you know, when I think about it, do you have any idea how much success in life depends on timing? And of knowing the difference between the time to laugh and the time to mourn? The time to gather stones and the time to scatter them? The realization that there is a time for everything and to grasp the moment. The expression in Latin is carpe diem, which means seize the day. Grab it. Now's your chance. Go for it. Well, the awareness of timing, that now is your time for whatever it may be, is the difference oftentimes between success and failure, and sometimes even the difference between life and death. He goes on to say there's a time to search and a time to give something up as lost. You know, you can look and look and look, but sooner or later you've got to say, no, it's lost. There's a time to keep and a time to throw away. Some of us, our garages would be a whole lot neater if we knew that, knew the difference. There's a time to tear apart and a time to sew together. There's a time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love, a time to hate. A time for war, a time for peace. And in the same way, there is a time for a man or woman to come to God, to respond to God, to accept the testimony of God, and to begin to apply that testimony in their life. There is a time. And sometimes one of the reasons why I am glad to be on the radio with the Bible is I know that somewhere across this country every day, the time of somebody's life crosses whatever part of the Bible that I am in. It's not everybody. It's not all the audience. But sometime, every day, somewhere, sometime, someone's life has reached a time And they have suddenly, at the same time, come into contact with an understanding from the Bible that is at that time in their lives. And it turns their lives right side up. I could have started to say upside down, but that's not really what happens. It really is a change, and they come to see that there is a change, something they need to do. So, this time, as I said, very rarely happens when everything is going your way. It just doesn't happen to people. And I think, as I said, this is one of the reasons why Jesus said it was so hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. Wealth conveys a false sense of security, a false sense of power, and it is the powerless that tend to come to God. It is that sense of a lack of power, of not having empowerment, of not being able to do, of being weak and helpless, and being defenseless, that actually causes people to come to God in the first place. And the whole thing is a lot like a parable that Jesus gave back in Matthew the 13th chapter. And if you have a Bible with you, I wish you'd turn back there with me, because what I'm going to read to you here is one of the most important things that I could possibly tell you. In Matthew the 13th chapter, in verse 1, the same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the seaside. And great multitudes were gathered together unto him, so that he went into a ship and sat, and the whole multitude stood on the shore. And he spoke many things to them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went forth to sow. Now, you're not going to be very successful at this, but I want to ask you to do something just the same. I'm going to ask you to kind of imagine that you had never heard this parable before, that you didn't have a clue what Jesus was talking about. All right? Now, bear in mind also that the chances are your Sunday school teacher told you somewhere back down the line, or a minister did, that Jesus spoke in parables to make his meaning clear. That he used a parable as an illustration, a comparison, an analogy. And we use analogies in public speaking. We try to take something that is familiar to you, and we compare it to something that is unfamiliar, so you will come to understand the unfamiliar, right? That's what analogies are for. All right. Now, if you consider what Jesus is doing here, then, if what he is doing is an attempt to make his meaning clear, then there ought to be the two sides of the equation. What you understand and what you don't understand that is made clear by what you do understand and the comparison between them, right? That's what ought to be here. The problem is, the other side of the equation is not here. Listen to what he says here. He said that he spoke to them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went forth to sow. And when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them. Some fell on stony places where they did not have much earth, and they sprung up because they had no deepness of earth. And when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them, and others fell into good ground and brought forth fruit, some 100-fold, some 60-fold, some 30-fold. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And folks, that is all Jesus said about this parable to the multitude. Now, we tend to immediately attach meanings to them. But the problem is we do it because we know. We have this whole background of the Old Testament, New Testament, and particularly of Jesus' explanation of the parable, which most of you here probably have read at one time or another, to his disciples. And so, yeah, you know basically what the seed is and what the seed means. But the crowd around him didn't. And he went away from them at this time. And later on, the disciples came to him, it says, and they asked him, Why do you speak to them in parables? Now, I don't know why it took me so long to come to this in my life. That question makes absolutely no sense at all. If Jesus spoke in parables to make his meaning clear, the disciples would have gone to him and said, That's a good parable. I know those people will understand that after you gave them that parable. No, the synonym for parable is not analogy. It is not comparison. The synonym for parable is riddle. Riddle. Where there is a comparison, but you're not told what it is, and you're left to figure it out for yourself. And if that's where we were, and I assigned all of you as a bunch of students to come back with interpretations of this riddle, I would have gotten nearly as many interpretations as there are people in this room. You would have said the seed means this, whatever. But you would not necessarily have come to what Jesus had to say about it. Now, listen to what he told his disciples when they came to him and asked him why he did this. Why do you speak to them in parables? And he said to them, Because It is given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. Now that was one of the most startling things I ever came to understand in the Bible, and I had read this before I ever understood it, and to this day I'm puzzled as to how come I and countless other people like me have read straight across that and have not understood the significance of what they're talking about here. Because the presumption is that Jesus' objective was to try to save everybody that was in front of him, and yet he speaks to a crowd and says it is not given to them to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. It is to you. And you know how he did it? It's really a simple thing. He told everybody the one side of the analogy. But to only his disciples he gave the other side. Normally, I would take something that you're very familiar with, driving your car, and I would sort of draw comparisons between that and flying an airplane so you might understand some of the principles of flying an airplane about which you know very little. All right? Well, Jesus was doing the same thing, but he did not give the other side to the multitude. He gave the other side to his disciples. Now, there is a very strong comparison in this parable that he's given here and the interpretation thereof and the kind of mass media work that we sometimes do. For in fact, the gospel is spread many ways. It is spread by personal evangelism. I would say in years gone by, I know more people who began to understand the basics of the truth of God from another person than I know people who first heard about it over the radio or television. And yet, radio and television does do it. It spreads it out there. And the analogy of this parable to radio or television is very interesting. He goes on to say, having said, whosoever has, to him shall be given, he shall have more abundance, but whoever has not, from him shall be taken away what he has. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because seeing they see not, hearing they hear not, they don't understand. In other words, these people were not ready for it. They were not ready, and something you need to understand about this. They were not ready, and it was their fault that they were not ready. Something that I think, out of our own religious background, we may sometimes not quite understand. They were not ready, and it was their fault that they were not ready. He goes on to say, in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which says, by hearing you shall hear and not understand. Seeing you shall see and not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed fat. You know what that means? Life is working real good for them. They're fat, dumb, and happy. Then therefore, what's going to happen? He goes on to say. He said, and they are dull of hearing. Their ears are dull of hearing. Their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your eyes, for they hear. Now, what do you suppose would have happened if someone in the multitude had come up to Jesus afterwards and said, Lord, I didn't understand your parable. What does it mean? I would say there's a pretty good chance he would have explained it to them, just like he did to his disciples who did ask. But the truth is, the majority of people don't really want to know. We have antennae, that start quivering a little bit when we get too close to an unpleasant truth. If there is something that might upset our lives, something that might turn us a little bit sour, something that might move us away from the truth, away from our comfort zone, we are very aware of that very quickly and back off just as quickly. That's all Jesus is saying. Their hearts are fat. Life's working. And they've closed their eyes and they've closed their ears because they don't want to hear, because it might make them uncomfortable. It might cause their life to change in some way. And see, here's the key. Unless you really are ready for your life to change, you aren't going to really much want to listen to God. Or to me, for that matter, who's nothing more than a preacher, a teacher, who's taken the Bible in hand and puts it out over the airwaves and gives you an explanation of it, tries to make it clear to you so you will understand it. I mean, you're not interested in that. If your heart's fat, life's working, the bank account's full, your car is running good and it's new, it's still on warranty, things like that don't bother you at a time like that. Well, he goes on to say, I say unto you that many prophets and righteous men have really wanted to see the things that you see and have not seen them, and to hear the things which you hear and have not heard them. So hear the parable of the sower. Now we get the other side of the equation. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and understands it not, then comes the wicked one and catches away what was sown in his heart. This is he that received the seed by the wayside. Okay, I got it. The seed is the word of the kingdom. Now, I don't know how many of you people here, as a part of your routine of life, ever plant seeds. You go down to the store, Payless Cashways, Lowe's, you buy packets of seed along the way. It may be grass seed, it may be flower seed, or what have you. Now, that stuff is expensive. I know if you start to decide you want to buy some centipede seed to do in your yard, you're going to spend a lot of money on that centipede seed. And so consequently, when you get out there and you're ready to scatter the seed on the ground, generally speaking, if you're going to invest that kind of money, you also invest the time in preparing the ground before you put it in, right? And you don't get your little seed spreader out and go out there and spread that seed so that it falls on your driveway. You make a point of not doing that. You try to keep all this expensive seed in the fertile ground, don't you? Okay, so there's something wrong with this then, as looked at as purely as sower and seed, and we ought to have tumbled to that when we heard the original story. What's wrong with this picture? Now, the second aspect of this then is that the seed, the message, and the Word of God is spread far and wide. It is allowed to fall on good ground, bad ground, concrete, good earth, you name it. It's allowed to fall where it will. Why? Because one never knows where it might take root. This struck me one day along the banks of the Buffalo River. We were setting up camp and had finished setting up, and we were sitting there in the evening enjoying the beauty of the river and the sound of the frogs and so forth as it developed. I looked up across the way, and there's a bluff that is just about as close to sheer as I could imagine. About halfway up, there is a small tree growing out of the side of that bluff, which to me looks like sheer rock, but in it, where that tree is, there's a crack, and there's just enough dirt, and that is blown in or what have you, to provide some soil in there, and a bird or a wind or what have you has put a seed in there, and a tree is growing out of what looks like solid, hard rock. Now, if you were the one who happened to be living in a crack in the middle of a lot of very hard rock, and you did have some soil around you, you'd be very grateful for that seed that fell on you, would you not? And the chance to have something grow and something important in your life. And I looked up across the river and I watched that and I thought to myself, and it was right there that I really began to understand one very important principle of this, that God is not wasteful of the seed, He is generous of the seed. And He allows it to go everywhere because even He doesn't know for sure where it will take root. Now that probably is going to challenge the way you think about God, because God's supposed to know everything. But there is something that God does not know. God does not know whether you are going to go straight home afterward this afternoon or stop off somewhere to get a bite to eat. He does not know that because you don't. You haven't made the decision. And since He's not going to make the decision for you, but will allow you to make it yourself, then He doesn't know. I understand that runs very contrary to what a lot of people believe about God. But the truth is that God only knows what you are going to do with the truth when you do it. Otherwise, you have no freedom. Otherwise, it's all predestination. What's the point? There's no point in chasing down this particular line, or there's no point in me worrying my head about spreading the gospel anywhere, because God will take care of it anyway. They're either going to be in the kingdom or not in the kingdom, regardless of what I do. And if that's the case, I would just as soon retire and manage my rental property as to do what I'm doing. It'd give me a lot more time for fishing. Now, when you think about this, God is very generous with the seed, and He scatters it everywhere because He's not sure what decisions people are going to make when it comes to it. And some of those people live in very inhospitable places. Okay? I can live with that. And He goes on to tell us in this parable here that he that received this seed in that particular place, he is he that received the seed by the wayside, but he that received the seed into stony places, the same is he that hears the word, and quickly with joy receives it, but he has no root in himself, but endures for a while, and when tribulation or persecution because of the word comes up, by and by he is offended. I've thought about that so many times, and the classic illustration of this for you to compare with it is one of the places where Jesus said, the man that hears my sayings and does them is like a man who built his house on the rock. The man that hears my words and doesn't do them is like the man that built his house on the sand. I think most of you are aware of this parable. Now, let me ask you something. You build one house on the rock, you build the other house on the sand, and in the course of the first 3-4 months, is there really any significant difference in the two? No. None whatsoever. Now, Jesus in the parable says, but then came the rains and the storm and the flood. And the house that was built on sand was washed away. The house that was built on the rock stood. Now let me simplify that for you and bring the comparison back home to a person's life. When things are going well, you can hardly tell the difference between one Christian and another. You can only tell the difference when they are under stress. When the pressure comes. When the temptation arises. And the stress will come. It will come in one form or another. And the question that's going to be resolved is whether or not you had any depth of earth in yourself. And that involves choices that you make. Just like in the case of the house, he said, he that hears my word and does it. Now, isn't that a choice that is before you? I'm sitting on the air giving Jesus' word out on the airwaves every week. You know, here it comes. In fact, I do the broadcast twice a week most of the time to get ahead of the game. And we're out there broadcasting the words of Jesus. And those people who hear his words, at the moment they hear them, have a choice. They can do what he said, or they can not do what he said, right? Isn't that their choice to make? So in that parable, Jesus is talking about 2 houses being built, but the houses are representative of the choices that people make to obey or not to obey. And it is in the obedience that the foundation is properly laid. It is in the obedience that we find root in ourselves so that when the stress comes, we can stand. It won't be uprooted or washed away or torn down like the house. By and by, when persecution arises because of the word, he's offended. He also that receives seed among the thorns is he that hears the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches chokes the word, and it becomes unfruitful. And that's an interesting, I think, that also involves decisions about things you think are important to you. The cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches. It's like I told you a while ago. This is why Jesus said it's so hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. It's because they don't need anything. Wealth has the habit of making you feel secure and safe. And when you feel secure and safe, you don't have any need to change anything. Because change has got nowhere to go but down. So they don't do anything. They don't respond. In other words, the deceitfulness of riches, and it is slippery, chokes the word and it becomes unfruitful. He that receives the seed in the good ground is he that hears the word, understands it, and bears fruit. Some 60, some 100, some 30, and so forth. And then he shifted off and went in the direction of some additional parables. So in the end, you really have got to decide what kind of soil you are. And it is in some measure a matter of choice. This parable, by one interpretation, seems to say that you are what you are. You can see that, can't you? That someone could go through this parable and conclude, well, it's just bad soil, not a thing in the world we could do about it. He is what he is. But if you sit and think about that long enough, you've got to realize there's something wrong with this somewhere. Because God made us creatures of choice, and we do have choices to make. And when you put the parables together and the teachings of Christ together, you realize you're not just what you are. That you can be something different from what you are. You have the power to decide to obey God. You are not a victim. And if you are a victim, being a victim is no excuse for not obeying God. Forget it. It doesn't work that way. I believe that we all have choices. And the reading and the study of the Bible will cut through all the nonsense in your life and will help you to make the right choices. And if I can help you with the Bible, then I have done my job. I don't have to make your choices. My job is to be sure, as far as I am able, that the Bible is there for you, understood by you, as clear to you, as far as I can. And if you need fellowship and encouragement from like-minded people, well, they are here as well.